The night I learned my own son no longer saw me as his father happened under Christmas lights. "Hello, buddies, my name is Walter Hayes. I'm 71 years old. I've buried a wife, built a company from dust and debt, and raised one son with these same hands you're hearing about now. I've lived by one rule my whole life. If you build something with honesty, it should shelter the people you love." That night, I learned even the strongest roofs can crack from the inside. It was Christmas Eve, early evening, the kind where the house smells like roasted meat and pine needles, and the air feels warm enough to forgive old arguments. I arrived at my son Daniel's home carrying two gifts for my grandkids, Evan and Lily. Evan's taller than me now, all knees and growing confidence. Lily still hugs my waist like she's afraid I'll disappear if she lets go. When they ran toward me shouting, "Grandpa," something loosened in my chest. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I was wrong about the tension I'd felt all year. I handed them their gifts. Evan ripped his open right there, a model kit he'd been begging for. Lily hugged the scarf I brought, the one my late wife started knitting before her hands got too weak. She pressed it to her cheek and smiled. That smile almost made me forget why my shoulders felt tight the moment I stepped inside. My daughter-in-law Laura came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, wearing that polite smile she always used around me. Too polite, the kind that measures distance instead of warmth. "You came early," she said. "Dinner's going to be special tonight." I nodded, but something in her eyes felt calculated, like I was being sized up instead of welcomed. Daniel came in behind her holding a bottle of wine. "Hey, Dad," he said. No hug. No handshake, just words, flat ones. I told myself not to read into it. Parents make excuses for their children even when the signs are screaming. The dining table was set perfectly. Red runner, gold candles. White china polished until it reflected the light. 8 place settings. I counted them without thinking. There were only 6 of us. "Expecting company?" I asked. Daniel hesitated just a second too long. "Laura's father is joining us." The room shifted. Her father, Richard Cole, was a name I knew well. We'd competed in business for decades. Shaken hands in public, undercut each other in private. Not hatred, but never friendship. The kind of man you respect from a distance. When Richard arrived, Daniel practically rushed to him, took his coat, poured his wine, pulled out his chair. I watched my son move with an eagerness I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I told myself it didn't matter. I was there for the kids, for family, or at least what I thought was still family. When it was time to sit, I took my usual place at the head of the table. I'd sat there for years. Since my wife passed, that seat had become more than furniture. It was where I carved turkeys, told stories, and tried to keep traditions breathing. Daniel stood up. "Dad," he said, his voice suddenly cold, "I need you to give that seat to Richard. He's the guest of honor." For a moment I genuinely thought he was joking. "Daniel," I said quietly, "that's my seat." His jaw tightened. "Not tonight." I started to stand on my own, more out of disbelief than obedience. That's when his hand hit my shoulder. Hard, no hesitation. The chair tipped. I went down. I remember the sound more than the pain, the scrape of wood, a wine glass shattering, someone gasping, Christmas lights blinking above me like nothing had happened. No one helped me up. Laura covered her mouth like she was watching a scene in a movie. Richard simply sat down in the chair that had been taken from me and took a sip of wine. Daniel didn't look at me at all. I pushed myself up off the floor, my palms burned. My suit was stained. I straightened my jacket anyway. Old habit, pride maybe, or survival. I looked around that table, the one I thought stood for family, and understood something in that silence. They didn't see a father anymore. They saw an old man who could be moved. If you're still listening, take a second and tell me where you're listening from. I've learned that sometimes just knowing someone else hears you makes standing back up a little easier. And if this moment stirred something in you, tap that like button so this story finds the people who need it. I took a seat at the far end of the table and said nothing else that night. But inside, something had shifted. Not anger, clarity. They thought I'd lost a chair. What they didn't know was that I had just found my footing. They thought what happened at that table was a moment. For me, it was a summary. While they talked over dinner, laughed too loudly, and clinked glasses like nothing had cracked, my mind drifted backward through 40 years I rarely let myself revisit. I didn't hear their conversation anymore. I heard a younger version of myself breathing hard inside a half-built warehouse, hands blistered, boots soaked through, wondering if I'd made a mistake trying to build something from nothing. I raised Daniel alone after his mother died. That's not something people see when they look at balance sheets or company awards. They don't see the nights I slept in my truck because the shop rent was overdue and I needed every dollar to keep the business alive. They don't see me skipping meals so I could wire tuition money on time. They don't see me standing in the rain outside a graduation hall because I didn't want him to notice my jacket was falling apart. I didn't just give him a life, I gave him options. And somewhere along the way, options turned into entitlement. Daniel wasn't always like this. As a boy, he used to follow me around job sites, dragging a hard hat too big for his head. He asked questions, real ones, why foundations mattered, why shortcuts always cost more later. I used to tell him, the ground remembers everything you try to hide. I wonder when he stopped believing that. The change came slowly. First the suits, then the tone, then the way my advice became old-fashioned. He stopped asking questions and started making statements, started using words like leverage, optics, positioning, words that sound smart until they replace character. I trusted him anyway. That's the part that still stings. I gave him authority because I thought responsibility would ground him. Instead, it fed something darker. People around him started treating him like a prince instead of a steward. And he liked it. Back at that table, watching him lean toward Richard, nodding eagerly, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding. My son wasn't trying to impress a guest. He was trying to replace me. The seat wasn't about respect. It was about erasing. Every compliment he gave Richard was a subtraction from me. Every shared glance between them said, "You're old, you're finished, you're in the way." And the hardest part wasn't the shove. It was realizing that when I hit the floor, he didn't flinch. A man who still sees his father as human hesitates, even in anger, even in arrogance. Daniel didn't hesitate at all. I looked at my grandchildren across the table, their laughter softer now, confused by a tension they didn't understand. And something in me hardened, not against my son, but against my own mistake. I had confused love with protection. Love teaches. Protection hides consequences. As I sat there, nodding politely while plans were discussed over my company, my work, my legacy, I made a decision so quiet no one noticed it happening. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't embarrass him back. I would let reality do the teaching I had delayed for too long. Because some lessons don't land when they're spoken. They land when the safety net disappears. And if you've ever loved someone so much that you shielded them from consequences, only to watch that love turn into disrespect, you're not alone. You can share that thought below. Sometimes admitting it is the first step toward fixing it. I finished my meal in silence that night. But inside, the father in me stepped aside. And the builder woke up. I didn't confront Daniel that night. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even let my face show what was already settling in my bones. I left early. The wind outside cut through my coat as I walked to my car, sharp enough to wake me fully. Christmas lights along the street blinked cheerfully, like they were mocking what had just happened inside that house. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, hands resting where they always had, steady, familiar. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. Clarity has a way of cooling anger. When I got back to my place, I turned on every light. I didn't want shadows. I wanted to see everything clearly, just like I had learned to do on job sites decades ago. You don't pour concrete in the dark. You don't make decisions when you can't see the full picture. I took off my jacket, loosened my tie, and stood there breathing in the quiet. No laughter, no clinking glasses. Just the low hum of the city outside and my own thoughts lining up like steel beams waiting to be placed. I thought about the first contract I ever signed. $10,000. I remember my hand shaking because I knew if I failed it was on me. No fallback, no one to blame. That pressure made me careful. It made me honest. Daniel never felt that pressure, and that was my fault. I poured myself a glass of water, not whiskey. I needed my head clear. Then I picked up my phone and opened the contact I'd had for over 30 years. My attorney. A man who had seen every version of me, broke, rising, winning, and grieving. "Ethan," I said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "I need you first thing in the morning. We're revoking all signing authority and trust access from Daniel. Every last one." There was a pause. "Walter, this is Christmas." "I know," I said calmly. "That doesn't change the math." Next, I called my chief financial officer. She didn't argue, she never did, she just asked one question. "Are you sure?" "I'm certain," I answered. "Freeze every account he can touch. I want a full report by morning." Then my operations director, a man who'd started as a foreman and worked his way up. Loyal, quiet, honest. "I need you in the office at 8, I told him. "You're taking interim control." He didn't ask why, he just said, "Understood." When I set the phone down, my reflection caught my eye in the dark window. Older, yes, but not weak, not confused, just awake. I opened my laptop and logged into the company system. Every file, every contract, every authority trail I had ever signed sat there waiting. This wasn't emotion. This was structure. And structure is something I understand better than most people understand their own families. Daniel's power existed because I allowed it. And allowance can be withdrawn. I reviewed clauses I'd written years ago, back when I still believed trust needed protection. Conflict of interest, loss of confidence, immediate termination without appeal. Words that once felt theoretical now felt precise. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. Each digital signature landed clean and final. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is loud, sloppy, satisfying for a moment and expensive forever. This was correction. By the time the clock read past midnight, everything was in motion. Documents prepared. Access scheduled to be cut. Authority rerouted. A system reset that would begin at sunrise. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. For the first time that night, the weight in my chest eased. If you've ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting what's right, you know how heavy that decision feels. You can share your thoughts below. Stories like this don't end in silence unless we pretend they don't exist. I turned off the lights one by one and walked toward the bedroom. That night, I didn't lose sleep, because I wasn't destroying anything. I was finally rebuilding. The foundation. Morning didn't arrive gently for Daniel. It crashed into him. While the city was still waking up, while coffee machines hummed and radios murmured holiday songs, the first call came in. Then the second, then the third. By the time he finished pulling on his jacket, his phone felt heavier than it ever had before. Banks don't yell. They don't accuse. They speak politely, which somehow makes it worse. Lines of credit suspended, corporate cards locked, guarantees revoked, accounts under review. Daniel drove to the office believing there had been a mistake. That was always his first instinct. Someone else had messed up. Someone would fix it once he showed his face. He still thought his title could bend reality. It couldn't. When he swiped his badge, the light didn't turn green. He tried again. Red. A security guard he'd barely noticed for years stepped closer, not aggressive, just firm. "Sir, you'll need to check with administration." Administration was already waiting. His office door was open, but the room wasn't his anymore. Boxes sat stacked neatly by the wall. His nameplate was gone. Sitting at the desk was the operations director, calm, composed, avoiding Daniel's eyes. "There's paperwork for you," he said, sliding an envelope forward. Daniel didn't open it right away. He didn't need to. He could feel the truth through the paper. Termination, loss of trust, conflict of interest, words that don't ask for explanations. For the first time, Daniel understood something that had never fully landed before. Power only exists as long as someone allows it. He left without shouting, without pleading. Pride still kept him upright, but it was cracking. In the parking lot, his phone rang again. This time it was the dealership. The car he loved, the one he treated like a badge of success, was being repossessed due to revoked guarantees. He stood there, keys in hand, while the tow truck hooked it up. That was the moment people around him started to look away. Back home, Laura was already pacing. Papers lay scattered on the kitchen counter. Notices, warnings, statements that all said the same thing in different fonts. "What did you do?" she asked, not screaming, just stunned. Daniel tried to explain, tried to blame timing, misunderstandings, holidays. The words fell flat. Even he could hear how weak they sounded. The house still had Christmas decorations up, lights blinking, a tree glowing softly in the corner. The contrast made the silence unbearable. Evan and Lily hovered on the stairs, sensing something was wrong but not knowing where to place the fear. Laura told them to go to their rooms. Her voice shook when she said it. That night Daniel sat alone at the table where I had once fallen. Same chair, same place. No honor in it now, just emptiness. Meanwhile, I sat across the city, reading quiet reports as they came in. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I felt something heavier and cleaner than satisfaction. I felt inevitability. This wasn't cruelty. It was consequence catching up after years of delay. If you've ever watched someone you love lose everything because of choices they refuse to question, you know how complicated that feeling is. You can share that below, not to judge, just to understand. By the end of that day, Daniel had lost his position, his access, and the illusion that his name could protect him forever. The fall wasn't dramatic anymore. It was complete. And somewhere beneath the wreckage, something uncomfortable was waiting for him. Reality, Daniel didn't land softly. After the calls stopped and the house went quiet, there was nowhere left to hide. No office to rush to. No assistant to fix things. No father to absorb the impact. Just a man sitting in the wreckage of his own choices, staring at walls that no longer felt like his. 2 nights later, he packed a small bag and left before dawn. No goodbye speeches. No dramatic exits. Just a quiet walk into cold air with everything he still owned fitting into one worn suitcase. That's how he ended up at a place called Midnight Shine Cleaners. A glass building downtown, quiet during the day, alive only after the city slept. Fluorescent lights, chemical smells. Floors no one notices unless something goes wrong. Daniel stood there holding a folded resume that suddenly felt ridiculous in his hands. The night manager looked him over, tired eyes, practical tone. "Any experience?" she asked. "No," Daniel said. His voice didn't crack, but it wasn't confident either. "But I'll work, I won't be late." She studied him for a long second, then handed him a uniform and a mop. "Night shift, 10 to 6. You mess up, you're gone." He nodded. "Understood." That first night his hands blistered. His shoulders screamed. The mop water sloshed onto his shoes, cold and unforgiving. At one point he missed a spot along a baseboard, and the manager made him redo the entire floor. He didn't argue. He lowered his head and started again. No one there knew who he used to be. No one cared. To them, he was just another man cleaning up after people who would never look him in the eye. And strangely, that anonymity did something to him. It stripped him. The hands that once signed contracts now scrubbed chair legs. The man who once gave orders now took them. And for the first time in years, every dollar he earned was tied directly to effort, not influence. The first paycheck was small, embarrassingly small by his old standards. But when he held it, his hands shook anyway, not from fear, from meaning. He rented a tiny room, shared walls, thin mattress, instant coffee, train rides instead of luxury cars. And every night he showed up early, did more than asked, cleaned what others skipped. No speeches, no redemption arc, just repetition. Some nights, while mopping high floors, he'd look out at the city lights and remember how he once stood behind glass with his name on the door. Instead of anger, he felt something new settle in. Humility. Meanwhile, I heard about him through quiet channels. No pleas reached me. No apologies, just reports. On time, works hard, keeps his head down. I didn't step in. I didn't rescue him, because this part mattered. If you've ever hit a point where starting over felt humiliating but necessary, you understand what that mop really was. Not punishment. A mirror. And if this part of the story resonates with you, take a moment to leave a comment. Sometimes acknowledging where we started again is how we keep going. Daniel was learning something he'd missed his entire life. No job is beneath a man who's trying to rebuild his honor. And for the first time since that Christmas night, the ground beneath him wasn't collapsing anymore. It was teaching him how to stand. Time has a way of revealing whether change is an act or a habit. Weeks turned into months and Daniel didn't quit. He didn't look for shortcuts or favors. He showed up early, stayed late, and cleaned places no one assigned him to clean. The night manager started trusting him with the harder floors, the ones other people avoided because they took longer and paid the same. He accepted them without comment. He rented a small room near the train tracks. Nothing fancy. A narrow bed. A table just big enough for a notebook and a cup of coffee. On the wall, he taped a single question on plain paper. Did I live worthy today? Every morning before sleeping, he looked at it. He called Evan and Lily once a week. Never asked about money. Never complained. Just homework, school stories, small laughs. When the call ended, he sat quietly for a while, like he was finishing a confession without words. One night, standing on a high floor with a mop bucket beside him, he looked out over the city. The same skyline he used to admire from a leather chair now looked different. Smaller. Quieter. Less like a kingdom and more like a place full of people trying to get by. That was the night he decided to write. Not an apology. He knew apologies were cheap when they came before change. This was something else. An accounting of truth. He wrote slowly, carefully, like every word had weight. He admitted everything. No excuses. No blame. He didn't ask to meet. Didn't ask to be forgiven. He wrote only what he had learned. That dignity comes from work done when no one is watching. That titles don't protect character. And that consequences had saved him from becoming someone worse. When he finished, he folded the letter and didn't send it right away. He kept it in the drawer beside the photo of his kids. A reminder, not a request. I heard about his routine through others, always on time, covers shifts, doesn't talk much, works like a man paying off a debt he never wants to owe again. I listened without reacting. Silence was still part of the lesson. Then one morning the letter arrived. I didn't open it immediately. I held it first, thin paper, careful handwriting. The kind that tells you the person writing isn't rushing anymore. When I read it, I felt something loosen that I hadn't realized I was still holding tight. No anger, no relief, just quiet. Days passed before I responded. When I did, I kept it short, honest. No promises, no reunion, just acknowledgement that I had seen the man he was becoming. Not forgiveness, recognition. If you've ever waited for someone to change instead of begging them to, you know how rare that moment feels. You can share that thought below. Sometimes patience is the hardest discipline of all. Daniel kept working. Same shifts, same mop, same question on the wall, but something inside him had settled. He wasn't cleaning floors to survive anymore. He was building a man he could live with. And that kind of construction takes time. The chair at the head of the table stayed empty after that Christmas. I never moved it back. I never replaced it either. Time passed quietly. Projects moved forward. Blueprints spread across conference tables. Concrete was poured. Steel rose. Life did what it always does when you stop fighting it, it continued. Daniel didn't come knocking. He didn't call asking for a second chance. He didn't try to remind me who he used to be. He stayed where he was. Night shifts, early mornings, honest work, consistency. That mattered more to me than any apology ever could. I learned through quiet channels that he'd been promoted. Not because of his name, not because of favors, because people trusted him, because he showed up. Because he did the work no one applauds. That told me everything. I adjusted my estate plans without ceremony. Everything I built would flow forward, not backward. Evan and Lily would grow without carrying the weight of adult mistakes on their backs. No announcements, no speeches. Some foundations are poured in silence. One afternoon, months later, I received a short note. No request. No expectation, just proof that discipline had taken root. I read it once, then again. Then I put it away where I keep things that matter. I didn't rush to forgive. Forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a result. What I felt instead was something steadier. Respect. The kind that returns only when behavior changes, not when words do. I poured a glass of wine that night and sat by the window. Snow fell softly outside, just like it had the night everything broke. But this time it didn't feel cold. It felt clean. I thought about the boy who once followed me around job sites, the man who shoved me down, and the worker who now cleaned floors with care. People think justice has to roar. It doesn't. Sometimes justice is letting a man fall far enough to learn how to stand correctly. I don't know what the future holds for Daniel and me. Maybe distance will remain. Maybe one day it won't. But I do know this. He's finally facing the right direction. And that's enough for now. If this story made you think about someone in your own life, or about a moment where you had to choose between love and limits, share it in the comments. You never know who might need to read it tonight. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, about mistakes, consequences, and the slow work of becoming better, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay with me. Some lessons take a lifetime, some take one hard night, but growth is always possible.